Okay, it's time for another Zettelkasten update. Let's start here. It's growing. Sherlock is growing. Oop, as I bounce everything around and smack stuff. I've almost filled this box. So I think I'm reaching the point where I'm going to need 2 boxes. We're moving up to 2 boxes soon. I think what I'll do is I'll move all the indexes, the index and what would you call this? The bib section. Jeez, run out of words. Move the bib section and the index into a separate box. I think that's the next step once I get back here. You also might notice that this section here is new, or at least you'll notice that it's separated from this section. So index, bib section, biographical. I'm trying that out. I'm trying out the thing where you put people's names in. I've only used it twice so far, but I think it'll be pretty handy. I think the main advantage of it is that you're not clogging up your index with biographical information. So when you want to get to a name, you can get to it faster. When you want to get to a topic, you can get to it faster instead of them being all interlaced. At this point right now, where I barely have anything, comparatively in them, it doesn't really make a difference. But I was already getting some more tabs. So I figured, let's buy those and make a bib section now. Might as well start making it. It's easier when you do it at the beginning than adding it later because you don't want to go through all your cards. Which brings me around to the topic that we were talking about last time. We talked about I screwed up and I did things a little differently, maybe than would be expected in branching in Zettelkasten. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch the video. I won't reiterate it here and bore everybody. But I will just pick up where we left off, and I said, well, I'm just going to live with it. I didn't. I did the one thing that I told you probably should never do, and mostly because it's difficult and because you don't really need to. And it's still correct, but it started to bug me that some of the branches in here just didn't make sense for the categories. So I just kind of started sifting through the cards and realized, you know what? I'm just going to go through all these cards. So I'll go into this a little bit more detail, but let me say just from the beginning, if you're going to change something in your Zettelkasten, you're going to move things around, you're going to have to throw your index away and redo your entire index. Period. Because otherwise you're going to have an index that's pointing to cards that aren't there. You're also going to have to do what I did, which was grab each section and individually reinstall them all. Which, fortunately for me, over half the cards were already where I wanted them. I didn't have to move them. I just had to look through them and go, yep, this is the way that I want them to branch, and this is the section that I want them in. But then other ones I had to move. And what's interesting is some of them moved to different sections. Some of them just moved around in the category that they were in. I just had them ordered differently. And there's not really a big deal in things being ordered differently. I was already doing it, so I just reordered them. And what I mean by ordered them differently is like, maybe I had, here, let me just, to make this more visually appealing than you staring at my hands, maybe I had a card here and a card here, and the way that I had them, this was 12.1 and this was 12.1a. The reason that they were in that order is because I read whatever source this came from first, and then this was related to it because I read it later. But when going back through the cards, I realized, hey, you know what? This is actually the top level idea, and this is actually a child of that. It doesn't really matter because they're connected to each other, and if you got to the branch, then you'd find all the cards together. But since I was already redoing stuff, some of the cards I just did this. I put the main level top and then the other one under. It's not going to continue like that, of course, because as I'm going to continually read things in the order that I read them, and sometimes I'm going to get the main level idea later. So it doesn't really matter. We're not creating a hierarchy here, remember? So don't get caught up in that. That's why I said the number thing didn't matter. The only reason I went through is because I wanted to give a little more weight to my categories than I had, because I was noticing that for me, the way that was working out for me, it was leading me into really deep numbers and thread numbers, our alphanumeric addresses, they were getting really long really quickly because things weren't more spread out in my box. I was continuing to build off of threads or strings that I already had, or branches that I already had, and they were getting really deep really fast. And that's not a terrible thing, but at a certain point, you don't want a ton of cards that are really long, because it just gets really difficult when you're trying to make a note to something. You're like, 37.1A, 1A, 1B, 1C, 3D, 1A. The chances of you copying that number wrong are pretty good. So by spreading things out a little bit more evenly into my categories, by putting things into the categories where they belong more, I'm actually able to keep those addresses shorter because things are spread out more. So they're not all in one thread of, like 15 thoughts. That's going to happen eventually, but it won't be my whole box that's developing like that. It'll be just really important branches that will get really long. What was happening to me is kind of all of them were slowly moving towards being really long. And I had really only like 5 categories that I was working in because I just kept building off the branches that were there. So like I said, you'll have to throw away your index. You'll have to reinstall the cards individually. It's a pain in the butt. It took me about 3.5 days. Now the first day I put in about 3 hours. The second day I put in 12 hours. And I'm not exaggerating. This, obviously I took time to go to the bathroom and time to eat. But I went in at 9 in the morning. I was at my desk at 9 in the morning. And aside from walking away to eat, and I think I went to the store for 20 minutes, I was done at 9 p.m. So 12 hours that day. And then the next day, about 3-4 hours. And then the last day, I think I only put in 2 hours. So it took a lot of work, and I only have approximately 200 cards. So if you're going to do what I did, which I don't recommend you do, because once again, you don't need to, and I'm crazy. And to be honest, I kind of wanted to see what would happen. I'm that type of person. I just kind of wanted to stress test it and see what would happen. But if you're going to do it, you should probably have 50 or less cards, unless you want to lose your mind. So that's one of the interesting things about this process, is just kind of playing around with stuff. And just like realizing that I screwed up, I learned a lot of things. Doing this really difficult process, I learned a lot of things, and I want to share a couple of them with you guys right now because I think you guys will be interested in them. I'm not sure. It's a bad way to start that. I'm not sure how valid it is. What I'm trying to say here is what I'm going to present to you is not universal truth about Zettelkasten. That's not what I do on this channel. I'm not a universal truth on Zettelkasten person, which should be obvious since my last video was called I Screwed Up. What I'm going to present you is thinking that I'm having right now that may be true, may be useful, or I may discover later, damn, I was wrong again. Just want to preempt that because I know that a lot of you guys are enjoying the videos and you're getting some useful information out of them as I'm learning, but I just want to keep reminding you guys, I'm still learning. I'm not an expert. Any opinion I give you is an opinion from someone who's only 200 cards or so into their first Zettelkasten. Okay? All right, now let's talk about that index. We talked about index briefly for a second there. One of the things I learned about index is when I started putting the cards back in, my index was just too insane. Oh, by the way, I did detour, but we're going to talk about this right here. I retired a couple cards. There were a couple cards that I got to, and I'm like, I shouldn't say a couple. Looks like there's about 6 or 7 of them. There are a couple that I retired. There's some that I made early on that were more information cards, and they didn't really fit when I started branching things. I'm like, this doesn't really fit in any branch or category. But I didn't want to throw them away because we don't throw things away in Zettelkasten. So I retired them. I put them back here. My main thought here is maybe one day I'll flip through these and realize, hey, you know what? That relates to a branch now. And then I can install it. So, once again, not an expert, not saying I recommend doing that, but that's what I did. I didn't want to throw them away. They're back there. But then what's here is my old index. I didn't throw my old index away either. So what I can do is I can show you this, okay? Is it on the back? A little bit on the back. This is what my index looked like before. It was pretty full already for only having about 200 cards, right? This is, we'll say this is 20, let's say this is 20 index entries here. That means 10% of my index is represented on this one card. Or 10% of my index of my, let me see if I can put that into a complete sentence. 10% of my cards are indexed on one card. And it wasn't like this for just one. You know, if you go through more of these, you can see, look, even F, about the same. So I was over indexing. And the reason I was over indexing is I was operating closer to the way we were tagging things. And I think I didn't really understand the idea of indexing and then things proving themselves. I don't remember if that was really clarified well in Scott's book, or maybe, you know, maybe something he covered in videos or whatever. You know, he can't cover everything in the book. So I think I didn't fully understand this concept. So this is something I want to share with you guys. When indexing this time, what I'm doing is I'm staying general until something proves itself and forces me to become more specific. So, you know, for example, see how much smaller my B is. My B was a big one in the other index. If I go over to fear or F, okay, let's take F out. I have 2 entries on F, and they're already crossed out and moved to separate cards. So what I did initially, let's pull this in here. Fear is not the greatest example because I did get more specific there, but for example, failure. If we go look at 7.8, this is going to be kind of a technical video, you guys, so hope you're in for the ride. 7.8, okay? In the creative process, failure is not to be avoided. It is part of the process itself. We do not stop at failure because failure is not an ending point for the process. It is simply an ending point of a branch or path. I wrote branch, I think. Yeah, I think I wrote branch. Our next step is iteration, okay? So when I index this, I didn't put failure in creative process or anything. I just said, what's the general term that this is about? Failure. I didn't put this under creativity. I didn't put it under creative process. Failure. This is about failure. I found one term and I put failure 7.8. Okay. Now, if we look at the one for fear, 7.4a, we're going to talk about this if I had done it right. I didn't do it right the first time. So 7.4a. This one. Resistance often shows up as fear. The greater the fear, the more important the thing we face is to us. Now, what I wrote was fear relative to importance. Okay? But what I should have done is, what's this card about? Fear. Forget everything else. Fear. And then go over here, and I index fear, and I put the number, right? Then the next time I'm doing the same thing and I run across a card that fits failure, or I run across a card that fits fear, that's time to create the new card. That's what proving it means. And then that's when you get specific. You go, okay, failure, 7.8. I have a new card for failure, but what's my old card about? Okay, my old card about failure, oh, it's about failure and the creative process. Okay, so I pull out a card and I say, create a card for failure. Now I put failure is a step, not an end, 7.8. And then the other card that I wanted to add was about business failure. So I put business failure, 7.2b3. And then of course I cross it out, put the arrows, say, look, go look to failure. Sorry. Now with fear, once again, go back to this. Resistance often shows up. Okay. So all I had was fear. All of a sudden I go through here and I'm like, oh, I have fear. I go pull out the index. I go, oh, I already have fear. So it's time to create a card for fear. It's proved itself. Fear. Relative to importance, 7.41. I'm stumbling over my words today. 7.4a. That's the term that I originally wrote. Fear relative to importance. But it didn't belong there. The more specific term belongs here when it proves itself. Then I also have fear of success. So what this allows you to do is if you have a card about failure, you know what? Let's pull a card that hasn't proved itself. Okay. I have a card about assassination, JFK, and one about anarcho-capitalism, right? I may never have a branch. These aren't cards, by the way. That's the other thing. You're not categorizing cards here. You're categorizing branches. So I may never have a branch again that's about assassination, and I may never have a branch again that's about anarcho-capitalism. So they'll never need their own card, and they don't need to be more specific, because when I go to look up something about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, I'm going to end up at assassination. I don't need it to be more specific because there's only one place to go. That must be where it is. Same with anarcho-capitalism. I don't need to be more specific about definition of anarcho-capitalism or detriments or benefits of anarcho-capitalism. I just need anarcho-capitalism, go to 6.7. Everything related to it is there because I don't have it anywhere else in the box, in a branch. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is the reason you end up with stuff like this is when you start to index cards instead of branches. Something doesn't become a branch until there's at least two cards. If it's just one card, it's just one card. So I don't index it until there are a minimum of two cards in the branch. And then all I have is index of branches. So when I want to find information on something, I go to the whole branch. Now, I've been reading a lot of you guys' comments, and I wanted to point something out that I think is really important that we tend to forget. The point of this is not information retrieval. This is not Roam Research. This is not LogSeq. This is not Apple Notes. This is not Obsidian. This is not where you put a piece of information in and go, one day I'll search it and I'll find that exact piece of information. That's not what this is for. That's not what Zettelkasten does. What this does is create a conversation partner with you about thoughts to help you think about topics in depth. This is for thinking, not for retrieval. So assassination, that's enough for me to find the JFK one. Right? I don't need to have it under conspiracy and all these other things because I'm not trying to find that one specific card. I'm just trying to find my way into places that are going to spark new ideas, not to the exact place I'm looking for. The least important thing to me when I'm looking up anarcho-capitalism is to land on the card that's the definition of anarcho-capitalism. That's the least important thing. What's more important for me is to get there and go, what's almost there? What's near this? What's around it? Because this card, yeah, it's there, but I'm not there to retrieve the definition because I can look the definition up. I can look certain things up. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to get me to find things that surprise me, that I'm putting information in here that's going to help me think in a way that's not a specified linear process that I would normally think, right? This is creating surprising connections. So when I go here, I don't care about that card really. That card is a starting place. I want to see everything above it, everything below it, everything that's a sister or a brother to it. I want to see everything in the whole section that it's in, the whole category that's in. Because something is going to spark a new idea for me. It's going to take me in a different direction. that card, that specific card, 6.7, is the least important card. This is not information retrieval. So you don't need to do what I was doing, which is to categorize cards or index cards. Index your branches. Just you're indexing neighborhoods. Get me in the neighborhood so I can walk around and look at all the other different houses. That's what's really going on here. So when I go and I want to find something on fear, the reason we do a card like this is, okay, say I had fear of success was a card that I had in my hand, right? And I go fear. Oh, I have a separate card for fear. And I pull the card fear out. Oh, fear relative to importance. Now these category-wise, subject-wise are not related probably. In this case, they are because they're both in section 7, which I think is my creativity section. Yeah. So there's a relation there. But if you look at failure, which is over here, one is in creativity, the other one is in 10, which is small towns. So maybe I'm researching something about small towns and I'm business companies failing small towns, and I'm looking here and I go to failure. Failure is not a step but an end. Maybe that sparks something. That's something to do with creativity. That's the purpose of these collections. It's not to retrieve information. It's to take you places in the box that aren't where you expect to end up. That's the purpose. So until that clicks, you're going to end up tagging. And you're going to end up with an index like this. Be more sparse with it. That's what the proving, I guess, what the term proving means. Make it happen. Now, let me show you another example of something. I want to talk about branches proving themselves, because it's not just about key terms proving themselves. I also think that branches need to prove themselves in order to be indexed. This is a little bit of a controversial idea, but if we go to 16.1, I did prepare for this. Okay. 16.1, we have inside, we have an ideal true self. It is imprinted upon us. We are called to it. The true self is who we are intended to be. Okay? That's a branch. And I've just pulled some cards out of that branch. So as a sub branch, or actually as a sub card, I have the genius is the Roman term for an inner spirit that guides us towards who we are intended to be. Oh, that's it. I don't have a 16.1A1. That's it. I just have that one card. But then if you go down to C, 16.1C, I have your daily life should reflect your goals. How we spend our days is how we spend our lives, which is Annie Dillard. And then John Lennon said, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. That one does have a subcard, a card we've seen before. Freddie Mercury in the movie Bohemian Rhapsody, he knows who he's destined to be, and he follows it without wavering. Okay? So when we go to this, let me move the box out of the way for a second. I think we need to look at this as if we're looking at an outline to make this a little more sensical. If this is our top level idea. Oh, sorry, wrong card. Where did our top level idea go? There it is. There's our top level idea. Now, if we're looking at an outline, that's the next bullet. And then this is the next bullet. And then under, get a little crowded here. Under the next bullet, a sub bullet. Okay? Level 1, level 2, level 3. This branch has proved itself because there's 2. So I index this, probably under true self. Actually, probably under self. Okay? This, the idea of the genius, which is the key term that I would use, does not have a subcard. So this is not a branch yet, in my mind. This has not proved itself. So I did not index this. And when I go to add things, if I find something, and if I find this and I put it behind it, then I will index that. Because what I put behind, the card that I put behind it, defines what this branch is about. The card doesn't necessarily define what the branch is about. The branch defines what the branch is about. So if we take a look down here at these. This is a branch that I did index. This is a branch that proved itself. Your daily life should reflect your goals. If I didn't have that and I was going to index these, I'd probably index that as genius, and I'd probably index this as goals. But here I have a card, right? He knows who he is destined to be, and he follows it without wavering. You must be willing to turn everything in your life to face that goal. So what I would actually index this as, not as goal, now that I've done this, I would index this as dedicate your life. Because now that I have this, now that this has context, these two things have context to each other, I understand the branch as a whole more. It's not really about goals. Goals is like the general thing that it's about, but what the branch is really about, the thing that makes the branch interesting and different, the thing that makes me want to find this branch is not going to be the term goals. It's going to be to define your life, determine your life, point your life towards something. And that's what this branch will be about. If I indexed it before the branch proved itself, then how do I know what the branch is actually about? So this may seem like it's going to be about the term genius in Roman. But maybe the next card I put here spins it more into this inner spirit. Or the next card that ends up here is about intention. We don't know what that branch is until it becomes a branch. So I do not index it until then. That's another way that I keep my indexes sparse, is to make my branches prove themselves as well. And I think that's a big tip. And I have a lot of confidence in that tip because it's one of the things that I was doing wrong before, is over indexing everything. And then I was in a situation where I was information retrieving and not getting into thinking, and this thing becoming a conversation partner. Now let's have a little water. Always got to have the water. Okay. I hope all of that was clear. If any of it wasn't clear, you guys have questions, please always ask questions. As I said in the last video, if I know the answer, or at least I think I can put forward an answer, I'll either answer in the comment if that's possible, or if it's something bigger that I think needs to be in a video, I'll make it up into a video. That's the whole point. I'm learning so that we can learn this together. That's my hope. So once again, not an expert, just figuring this stuff out. This is a small point here about branches before we leave branches. Don't think of branches as collections. This over here was not a collection about the true self. When you think about it as a collection, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up to think of this as note-taking and information retrieval, that you're creating a paper Wikipedia. It's not what you're doing. Instead, what you need to think of the branches as really interesting uses of words today. I'm terribly sorry, but today's the time I had to record. I want you to think of branches as conversations, because it's the most accurate. When I go here, what I'm really asking, I'm not saying what information do I have about the true self. What I'm saying is, what conversation is starting to build in here about the true self? Because this card might say something, make a statement. Usually the first card is a statement. Then the next card is support of that. But then the sister card of that might be an argument against it. That's a conversation. It's not information retrieval. We're creating conversations, which is why not landing on the specific card, why that's not important. It's about getting the neighborhood, because you just need to jump in on the conversation, because the conversation is what is going to spark what you want from the Zettelkasten. Not the, hey, I found that exact card about Google. Who gives a shit? That's not important. You can use a digital note-taking app for that if that's really important to you. Somebody asked me the question actually about a workflow between Zettelkasten and Anki or Anki. I don't know how you pronounce it. I think it's Anki. There is no workflow between the two of them. They're completely different things. So I told him, I'm gonna if you find value in Anki, keep using it. That's what it's made for. Keep using it. That's not what this is made for. This is not spaced repetition. This is not for you to learn. This is for you to think. It's a completely different tool. So if you have tools that you want to use to put information in, use them. I mean, look at Scott. You know, he uses his external references. He uses, I can't remember the name of the program, but you know what I'm talking about. He uses a digital program for external references. Zotero, there it is, came to my mind. He uses that. He's not anti-technology. I don't think you use Zettelkasten because you're specifically anti-technology. You use the Zettelkasten, the true analog Zettelkasten, as Scott would say. The reason you use it in analog is because that's how it works. The other ways don't work. They're missing pieces. You use this because that's the only way to do it. The other ways are missing pieces. That's why you use this, not because you don't want to use any digital apps. Now, personally, as you've seen with my renaming of the channel to Curly's Analog and my focus on going more analog, to me, my life right now is focused more on getting apps out of it and more tangible things into my life because I tend to like them more and they work better for me. But that doesn't mean you have to be the same way. If information retrieval is important to you, use Obsidian. Obsidian's freaking great, man. Just don't spend too much time worrying about your damn theme. Use the basic theme. Don't screw around with that. If you're going to put information in there, put information in there. But when it comes to thinking, this is where you come. This is where you get your hands dirty. You get your fingers in here. This is where it happens. Not information retrieval. Okay. I'm getting a little preachy. Okay. Damn. I was going to look up the person's name who asked this question. Somebody asked me a question about, sorry that I didn't write your name down. I forgot to do it right before I filmed the video. Somebody asked me a question about hub cards after the last video. And essentially saying that is this going to mean you're going to need hub cards? Well, hub cards are kind of already a part of Zettelkasten. It's not because of something you do or something you don't do that you're going to need hub cards. The reason I'm answering this, even though I answered him in the comments, is because I think a lot of you might be thinking the same thing. You don't use hub cards because of something you did. You use hub cards because it works. It's to your benefit in the system to create hub cards. You decide where you need them and you decide what to put them. But there's two kinds. These are hub cards, right? I'm collecting cards from across the box into here. Now the difference is this is a hub card that's made after the fact, right? This emerges. This is emergent structure. I only had one card about failure. Then I realized later I had another card about failure. All of a sudden it emerges that I have a collection building about the term failure. So that's a hub card that builds itself, but it happens afterwards. After you have a card in, after you're adding stuff, you don't pre-plan one of these. You don't go, I'm going to make a card about failure, and then I'm going to go and try to create cards to install in here about failure. Your pre-planned structure, the closest thing to pre-planned structure is your categories. Especially if you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, or even the way that Scott does it. Because I'm saying, I have one on small towns, so I'm going to go read more stuff about small towns because that's a topic that's important to me. So I've pre-planned that things are going to fit in there, right? But these aren't pre-planned. These are emergent, but they do happen in the midst. Maybe after is not the right word, but in the midst of using the box. This isn't something that you think about before. But the other kind of hub card is one that you do have to think about before. And I have a very good example today that I just made today. So this is a hub card. So far it's only got one branch following it. But I know, so this is in my economy category. I started reading about the gig economy. I know I'm going to want a branch in which I have a bunch of stuff about the gig economy. So I created a card which gives me a branch. Now I have a branch called gig economy. And all I'm going to put on this card, I could put a definition here too if I wanted, but what I'm putting on the card right now is just an index of what's underneath it. So if I know 11.2a is going to start a branch about arguments against the gig economy. Now, the reason I picked this specific branch is because this actually has a hub card within a hub card. When I go to that one, I see arguments against the gig economy, and I have 5 cards that branch off from there. One of those is this one. The gig economy creates the precariat, a poorly paid class of peer-to-peer workers who are often without benefits. Okay? Now, when I finished reading and I was doing my bib cards, this was my note. And what I was doing before I was really understanding how Zettelkasten work is I was just going, okay, this is about economy. Boom, and I put it in. It's a 11.2. And then I'd hope something went off from there. But instead, what I did when I went to install this is why we say install instead of just placing cards in. You have to think about where the card's going to go. You have to understand what the card's about, even before you write it. This wasn't even the note. This was, it probably just said precariat was probably my bib note. And I went, where am I going to put that? And then when I figured out what I wanted to do, what I did was I said, oh, okay, this is about them being poorly paid. That is an argument against the gig economy, which means that I want to branch about the gig economy. So I realized in the moment that I wanted to pre-create branches by using hubs. So I created a card on the gig economy. And I said, one of those branches is going to be arguments against it. Then here is my card about the arguments against the gig economy. I'm going to list them. And then each of those, since you see all 5 are there, each of those has a separate card. This is just one of them. But this was the only one. I created 2 hub cards in order to group this in a way that I wanted. You don't have to do this. The reason I did this is because this is how I want to retrieve the information. Whenever you're installing cards, what you should be thinking about more than anything, more than categories, more about anything about index, anything about numbering, anything about all of these. Think about when I am looking through this box, what do I want to find? So when I go through here, if somehow I end up on this card and I'm looking for something, maybe the term precariat comes up somewhere else. I doubt it because it's a term that was invented by an economist specifically for this case, but maybe I read another book about the gig economy and that term comes up again. And I end up on this card. Now, if this card was the only card in here, I would probably just install a new card and drop it below, right? But because I have these, what ends up happening here is I come and I go, and I backtrack a little bit and I go, oh, there's some other arguments against, okay. Yeah, this is part of, we're all in the gig economy here. I'm starting to look at all of these. And now I'm thinking about the whole topic as a whole, instead of just this term precariat. And maybe what I discover through doing this, with this new note that I haven't created yet, that's about precariat, is I realize this idea uses the term precariat, but it's actually about insecurity. Oh, this is not where I should install it then. I want to put it over here. So all of a sudden now I'm engaging with, instead of just mindlessly stacking things behind each other and giving them succeeding alphanumeric numbers, I'm thinking about the structure of what the information is here. And through the process, I'm experiencing this information again. So that the next time, maybe I put that other card in, we'll call it that one. I have a third card, maybe a year later, about the gig economy, and I end up here, and now I'm looking at these again, and I realize, oh yeah, I remember this stuff. And maybe the idea that's on this card is not going to be something that goes directly in, like this is what the author is saying. Maybe all of a sudden, because of the understanding I've gained from this process, doing it twice, this card becomes an argument. This card becomes supporting, or this becomes a branch, or all of a sudden it connects to something else because I've gained an understanding from the neighborhood. So the reason I keep using the term neighborhood is if we're calling these addresses, then this is your neighborhood. The gig economy here, this is my neighborhood. So creating hub cards is kind of like pre-planning streets. You're like, I know I'm going to have more about the gig economy. So let me pre-plan that street. I know that I have 5 arguments, at least so far, against the gig economy. Well, let me make that into a street. Here's the street. Okay, here's the house. And here's 4 other houses. And then maybe 2-3 years later, all of a sudden I discover, hey, there's a 6th house. That's the importance of the hub cards. So that's a better answer to that question than I was able to do in the comments, I think. So that's all I got today. That's where I am with the Zettelkasten. I hope that was interesting. I hope you guys do me one favor. When you're watching the videos, if you're engaged with the content, I'm not going to tell you to like and subscribe. But if you're engaged in the content, read the comments. Read the comments from other people. Because there are people with questions and ideas that if you're engaged with what I'm talking about, then there might be questions that you're able to answer. You're able to help people out in a way that maybe I'm not. And in addition, there might be things that people are talking about that are going to spark things for you. They're going to help you. That's kind of what's cool about this learning process is I'm just, I'm out here just making the videos, but there's so much more going on below. So please, if this is interesting to you, do yourself the favor. Nobody else, not me, nobody. Do yourself the favor and just read the comments. I'm not asking you to comment back. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just asking you for your own good. Read the comments and see if there's benefit down there for you in addition to what's here on the screen. Okay. Bye, guys.